Johnny Carson was flipping through his old Norfolk High School yearbook when a photo made him pause. There she was, Margaret N. Sullivan, the head cheerleader who had turned him down in front of the entire school back in 1943. What he learned about her life decades later would reshape the way he viewed rejection, comedy, and the cost that comes with success. This isn't simply a story about television or a teenage disappointment. It's about how the people who hurt us early on can end up showing us the most valuable truths about what we're actually looking for and why certain emotional scars stay with us even as we grow older and achieve more in life, successful beyond anything we ever imagined. It was a calm Sunday afternoon in 1987 at Johnny's Malibu home when he chose to sort through boxes of old memories from his childhood in Norfolk, Nebraska. He was preparing for his 25th anniversary on The Tonight Show and had been reflecting on his path from small-town magician to America's most familiar late-night host. Inside a dusty cardboard box labeled Johnny School Things, he found his 1943 Norfolk High School yearbook. As he flipped through the pages, noticing classmates he hadn't thought about in years, he stopped. At page 47, there she was in the cheerleading squad photo. Margaret N. Sullivan, squad captain, homecoming queen, and the girl who had broken his 17-year-old heart with a rejection so public and painful that it shaped how he handled relationships for decades. Even in the faded black and white picture, Margaret's appearance stood out. Hair set in perfect victory rolls, bright smile, and a confident posture that showed she had grown up without doubt or insecurity. Johnny's finger paused on her face. At 61, he was one of the most recognizable men in the country. Yet looking at Margaret's photo took him straight back to being the awkward teen who performed magic tricks and dreamed of making people laugh. Margaret and Sullivan, he whispered, recalling how her name once made his heart race and his palms sweat. But what he learned when he later decided to find out what happened to her would change his understanding in ways he never expected. October 23, 1943. 17-year-old Johnny Carson had spent weeks gathering the courage to ask Margaret and Sullivan to the Halloween dance. She was everything he wasn't: popular, confident, and from one of Norfolk's most respected families. Her father owned the biggest department store in town, and she moved through high school with the ease of someone treated like royalty. Still, Johnny convinced himself that his growing reputation as the school's entertainer might catch her attention. He had been performing magic shows at local events and was even trying out short comedy routines. People laughed at his jokes, and he hoped that might mean something to the most admired girl in school. That Friday after classes, Johnny finally approached her. Margaret stood at her locker, surrounded by her usual group of popular friends. Johnny walked toward her, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure others could hear it. "Margaret," he said, his voice shaky, "could I talk to you for a moment?" She turned, surprised. The hallway seemed to get quieter. "What is it, Johnny?" "Well, the Halloween dance is next Saturday, and I was wondering if you'd like to go with me." The silence that followed felt endless. Margaret's friends exchanged looks, holding back laughter. Her boyfriend, star quarterback Tom Bradley, watched with a smirk. Margaret's face turned bright red, not from embarrassment for herself, but clearly for Johnny. "Johnny, that's very kind," she said, carefully, "but I'm already going with Tom." Johnny nodded, trying to hide the weight of the disappointment. "Right. Of course. I should have known." Then Margaret's friend Susan added something that would stay in Johnny's memory for the rest of his life. "Margaret, why would you even consider going with him? He's just the odd magic kid who thinks he's funny, but really isn't. He'll never be anything more than a small-town joke." The group burst into laughter. Margaret didn't join in, but she didn't step in to support Johnny either. Johnny walked away, feeling smaller than he ever had. What he didn't realize was that this moment would push him toward a comedic drive that would one day make him one of television's most admired entertainers. What he also didn't know was the real reason behind Margaret's rejection, a truth that would change his understanding. Decades later, 44 years after that day, sitting in his Malibu study with the old yearbook, Johnny called his assistant, Peter. Peter, I need you to locate someone for me, he said quietly. Margaret in. Sullivan from Norfolk, Nebraska. She'd be around 61 now. Of course, Mr. Carson. May I ask what this is for? Just someone from long ago. Someone I need clarity about. Using his network, Peter was able to find Margaret and Sullivan, now Margaret Sullivan Bradley, in less than 48 hours. The information he delivered made Johnny's stomach tighten. Margaret had married Tom Bradley right after they graduated high school, exactly as people expected, but their seemingly ideal life had slowly fallen apart. Tom had faced alcoholism and gambling issues, eventually losing both the family business and their savings. For nearly 20 years, Margaret had been working as a seamstress and taking in laundry to provide for herself and Tom, who had become more dependent on alcohol and unable to keep a stable job. They now lived in a small apartment above a dry cleaner in Norfolk, the same town where she had once been seen as the school star and local favorite. She had never left Nebraska, never chased any of the dreams she once talked about, traveling, going to college, or building a life beyond her hometown. Instead, she dedicated her years to caring for a man whose struggles slowly took apart everything they had created together. But what Peter uncovered about Margaret's current life surprised Johnny even more. Margaret had followed Johnny's career with great interest for decades. Her small apartment was filled with Tonight Show recordings, magazine cutouts, and newspaper articles highlighting his achievements. Neighbors said she watched the show faithfully and often told people that she had gone to school with Johnny Carson. She had tried to contact him repeatedly over the years, sending letters to NBC, writing to fan magazines, and even calling the studio during his early days in New York. None of her messages ever reached him, but it was one item in Peter's report that made Johnny stop reading, a diary entry from 1943 found among Margaret's belongings when she was hospitalized the year before. I feel awful about what happened with Johnny Carson today. I wanted so much to say yes when he asked me to the dance. He's kind, funny, and unlike the other boys, but Daddy forbade me from speaking to that Carson boy. He says Johnny's family isn't good enough and that his magic tricks are embarrassing. Daddy threatened to stop paying for my college and to pull me from cheerleading if I disobeyed. I had to say no, but it broke my heart. I hope someday Johnny understands it was never truly about him. It was about my family's expectations and my own fear of standing up for myself. Johnny looked at the page, tears running down his face. She had wanted to say yes. Her refusal had nothing to do with him and everything to do with her father's attitude and the pressure she felt at home. But what Johnny chose to do next would surprise everyone who knew him. The following evening, Johnny sat in his home office and dialed the number Peter had given him. The phone rang several times before a tired voice finally answered. Hello, Margaret, this is Johnny. Johnny Carson. There was a long pause, then a sudden, sharp breath. Johnny, is this really you? It's me, Margaret. I came across your diary entry from 1943. Margaret began crying immediately. Oh my God, Johnny. I've been trying to reach you for 40 years. I know, he replied. I'm truly sorry I never received your messages. I wish I had understood what you were going through. Johnny, there's something I need to tell you about that day at school. I know, Johnny said gently, cutting in softly. I read about your father's ultimatum. You were trying to protect your future, and your family was trying to protect what they believed was right for you. I wanted to say yes so badly, Margaret sobbed. But I was 17, scared and afraid of losing everything. I chose what felt safe instead of following my heart, and it became the greatest regret of my life. Margaret, you didn't make a mistake, Johnny said calmly. You made the choice. You believed you had to. And in a way, you protected both of us from something that wasn't meant to happen. What do you mean? She asked. If you had said yes that night, I might never have felt the push that drove me to perfect my comedy. I might never have left Norfolk, never gone to California, never discovered my purpose. But what I want to tell you next matters even more. Margaret, I want to help you and Tom. Johnny, We can't accept charity. It's not charity, Johnny replied. It's gratitude. Gratitude for what? She whispered. For helping me understand that I wasn't meant for a simple life in Norfolk. Your rejection showed me that my real connection was always supposed to be with the audience, not tied to any one person. Johnny had already made up his mind during their call. I'm buying you and Tom a home, a proper place where you can live comfortably. And I'm setting up a fund to take care of Tom's medical needs and your long-term security. Margaret was crying so hard she could barely form words. Johnny, why? After how I hurt you. Because you didn't hurt me, Margaret. He said softly. You redirected me. And because I spent 44 years wondering why the first girl I ever truly cared for had turned me down. Now I realize it was never truly about love. It was about fear and situations neither of us could control. He paused. And because no one should have to give up their own dreams because of someone else's addiction. You've already done more than enough. What followed became the most healing conversation of their lives. Over the next 3 hours, Johnny and Margaret talked about everything, his struggles with multiple marriages and closeness, her years of sacrifice and personal disappointment, and the separate paths their lives had taken since that difficult day in 1943. I used to imagine what would have happened if my father had allowed me to say yes, Margaret admitted. I wondered about it too, Johnny said. But I think I understand now. What do you think would have happened? She asked. I think we would have shared a wonderful high school relationship. Maybe we would have married, stayed in Norfolk, and lived a quiet life. But America would have missed the Tonight Show, and millions would have missed the laughter it brought. Johnny's voice grew steadier. And you would have missed the chance to become the strong, loyal woman you became. You stood by Tom for 40 years through his hardest moments. That requires a kind of commitment I never learned how to give. Do you truly believe that? She asked. I do, Johnny replied. Because the pain of losing you pushed me to love performing the way I should have learned to love a person. It wasn't always the healthiest thing, but it created something that brought happiness to millions. Margaret stayed silent for a long moment. Johnny, can I share something? I've never told anyone. Not once. For 40 years, I watched you on television every night and thought about the boy who asked me to that dance. Your monologues, your timing, the way you treated your guests. I always knew you were still that kind, funny boy from Norfolk who just wanted someone to believe in him. Johnny felt tears fall down his face. Margaret, that may be the most meaningful thing anyone has ever said to me. But what followed would create a legacy neither of them had imagined. 6 months later, Johnny introduced the Margaret and Sullivan Foundation for Arts Education in small towns. Margaret, now living comfortably in a home Johnny purchased for her and Tom, became the foundation's first director of community outreach. This foundation exists because a teenage girl had to make a difficult choice between love and family expectations. Johnny explained during his announcement on The Tonight Show. She chose loyalty, and that decision shaped both of our lives. Now, we'll help young people in small towns avoid choosing between their dreams and their families. The foundation offered scholarships, equipment, and mentorship to young performers in rural communities. Its most distinctive feature was the Second Chance program, where successful entertainers who once faced rejection in their hometowns returned to guide the next generation. Margaret's experience growing up in a small town with big dreams became central to the program. Her understanding of family pressure and social expectations helped countless students. Johnny Carson had been rejected by a cheerleader in 1943. Margaret would tell young performers that the rejection didn't break him. It motivated him to succeed on a larger stage. Sometimes the people who say no in our small world are preparing us for yes in a bigger one, she would explain. Johnny added, rejection taught me that love and performance are two different forms of connection. I spent years trying to fill emotional gaps with applause, but applause isn't meant to replace love. It creates connection on a broader scale. Their shared testimony became the most influential part of the foundation's mission. During events, Johnny and Margaret often appeared together via satellite, sharing their story of rejection, understanding, and growth. I rejected Johnny Carson in 1943, Margaret would openly tell audiences. It was the hardest decision I ever made, and I carried guilt for decades. But now I understand that some rejections protect futures we can't yet see. Students would ask how that was possible. If I had said yes, Margaret would explain, Johnny might have stayed in Norfolk and never pursued entertainment professionally. Sometimes our limitations push others toward their full potential. Tom Bradley eventually recovered from addiction with the help of the treatment program Johnny supported. Margaret and Tom rebuilt their marriage and spent his final years traveling and enjoying the security Johnny provided. The Margaret and Sullivan Foundation became one of the most effective rural arts education groups in the country. By the time Johnny passed away in 2005, over 8,000 young performers had received guidance and support. Margaret continued leading the foundation until her death in 2010. At her funeral, hundreds of performers she had helped paid their respects to the woman who taught them that rejection in small places often leads to acceptance in larger ones. Johnny visited the foundation often during retirement, sometimes performing private shows for scholarship students. "The Tonight Show made me famous," he would tell them. "But helping you chase your dreams brings me happiness. There's a difference." The foundation's success rate, students who entered professional entertainment, was 34%, well above industry averages. But the most important lesson wasn't in the numbers. It was in the story Johnny and Margaret shared. Today, the Margaret and Sullivan Foundation continues its mission, having assisted more than 15,000 young performers in rural America. Their story highlights a meaningful truth about rejection and purpose. Sometimes the people who turn us down aren't rejecting us. They're protecting futures we don't yet see. Sometimes our painful moments become the sources of our greatest strengths. Sometimes letting someone go allows them to become who they were meant to be, and peace can come from that realization many years later. Margaret and Sullivan could have accepted Johnny Carson's invitation in 1943. They might have shared a romance, perhaps married, possibly lived a quiet life in Norfolk. But she said no. That no sent Johnny on a path that made him one of America's most beloved late-night hosts for 30 years. And her decision helped her develop the patience and loyalty that later inspired thousands of young artists to pursue their goals despite doubt from their hometowns. Today, when young performers feel discouraged in their small towns, mentors tell them about Johnny and Margaret, two teenagers whose heartbreak led them to their true purposes. They explain that sometimes, the person who rejects you may be protecting your destiny. They remind them that small stages often prepare us for greater ones. And they share that understanding, forgiveness, and meaning can still be found in old wounds. If this story moved you, remember that every rejection may be a step towards something larger than you expect. The cheerleader who rejected Johnny Carson did not break his spirit. She helped release it, so he could bring laughter to millions and later discover that some gifts are worth the challenges it takes to find them. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about ending up together. They're about understanding why you weren't meant to, and using that understanding to guide others toward their own meaningful futures.